Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think that the importance of the hearing regarding countering China on the world stage and not only dealing with American businesses, but the Chinese military as it reflects to the threat to our part of the world in the Pacific is critical, and I commend the committee for its hearing. I want to take a little different twist on this because my view is that for any administration and for the Congress, China is an adversary, China's a competitor, and China's a vast market, and that makes it difficult. And we're talking about the threat that is posed here as it relates to the nation that it's an adversary to us and to our allies. I want to do it in context of legislation that we've been looking at here that would counter that. I believe the administration supports the effort on the supplemental piece of legislation that would have provided $2.58 billion to bolster U.S. and allied capabilities in the Indo-Pacific. Is that correct?
Sir.
And we have an alternative to the supplemental that we are trying to get heard on the House floor that would provide $4.9 billion to provide deterrence and operations in the Pacific. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you're supporting the Senate bipartisan package, I would assume you'd support this as well if we could get it for a vote on the floor. Is that correct?
Congressman, we've requested $4 billion in discretionary funding for
right.
In the Pacific.
Well, my time's limited, but basically you want additional support, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And the reason for that is we've got to show up. Countries are looking for alternatives.
I agree, and we got to show up not only here, but as it relates to Ukraine. And I want to put these two in a comparative analysis. It's been 2 years since Putin launched his brutal invasion of Ukraine. Last week, Putin delivered an annual state propaganda or the union to the Russian Duma and said that as far as he went to threaten nuclear war if NATO sent troops to Ukraine. But let's be frank about it. Russia today is a syndicate, I think, that's masquerading as a nuclear, a nuclear syndicate masquerading as a country with a mob boss called Putin. That's how I describe modern-day Russia. And if you don't view that, look what he did just 3 weeks ago with his adversary, Alexei Navalny. He did what mob bosses do. He eliminated his opposition. But I think that China is watching what we're doing in Ukraine, just as Russia's trying to determine what is the resolve of the United States. And that's why I think the two are in the same category, frankly, and whether or not Congress provides this supplemental aid in any form, both to protect our interests in the Indochina as well as to protect our interests in Europe with our allies there. I met with a group of Ukrainian officials 3 weeks ago when I was in Kiev, and you see a group of brave Ukrainian folks that are not only fighting for their sovereignty and their democracy, but for ours throughout the world, which is what Taiwan's trying to do, is maintain their sovereignty and their democracy, as well as our allies in Japan and South Korea and Australia. And so I think there's a good comparative analysis about what we do with legislation to provide support, not only as it relates to the Pacific, but also as it relates to our European allies. But we're stuck with gridlock here in the House of Representatives. We can't get the supplemental bill to the House floor. We can't even get an alternative to the House floor that would provide funding for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. Ukraine is fighting and putting up a fight that I think is in our interest, just as our support for Taiwan and our allies in Japan and South Korea. When you look at what's happened in Ukraine, they've regained over half the territory that Russia's took. They've reopened the Black Sea, and they've stricken over 2/3 of Russia's tanks and 315,000 of Russia's troops. But I think for many of my Republican colleagues, I think they're showing weakness to Putin. I think this is analogous to 1939 when Neville Chamberlain went and appeased Adolf Hitler, because people recognize strength. And so I think the Speaker and my Republican friends need to talk about putting together a package that will provide supplemental aid to Ukraine, to Taiwan, and to Israel. Either of these efforts, I think, would really reflect a bipartisan support that has been there traditionally. A significant amount of the funding, by the way, stays in the United States as we build new weapons and replace weapons in our own stockpiles. So I think this, whether it's how we fund it in the supplemental package or whether we fund it in another way, the longer we delay aid to Taiwan and to Ukraine, the more Xi and Putin will exploit the situation. That's the bottom line. Our adversaries respect strength, and Putin won't stop until Eastern Europe is in his grasp, as Xi is watching to see whether or not the U.S. will support its allies. Do you agree?
100% concur.
Let me close, Mr. Chairman, if you
Very quickly, yes.
to quote an American president who understood strength. President Ronald Reagan said it best in 1984 when he said, "To keep peace, we and our allies must be strong enough to convince any potential aggressor that war could bring no benefit and only disaster." I think by abandoning support and funding for Taiwan, for Ukraine, and for Israel sends an opposite message to our adversaries and the rest of the world. The world is watching, and I ask my Republican colleagues, are we going to stand up with democracy, or are we going to stand up with Putin and Xi?